Hey everyone, Scott here to discuss The Karate Kid Part 3. Starring Ralph Macchio, Morita, Robin Lively, Thomas Ian Griffith, and Martin Kove, directed by John G. Avildsen. Now let's just pick up right where this movie left off, or the last movie, let me rephrase it as, because I've never seen this movie before. We pick up 9 months after the first Karate Kid film, and we pick up where John Kreese, returned by Martin Kove, is no longer employed as the sensei of the Cobra Kai dojo, and he's broke. And he goes to his friend Terry Silver, played by Thomas Ian Griffith, as he asks Terry to find Mr. Miyagi, returned by Pat Morita, and Daniel, returned by Ralph Macchio, and seek revenge against Daniel and Mr. Miyagi, as he tries to make them separate and suffer. As the next thing you know, Daniel and Mr. Miyagi come home from Okinawa to find the apartments are being shut down. As Daniel receives a message that his mother is at Uncle Louie's place, and Daniel stays with Mr. Miyagi as the college year starts, and Daniel thinks about opening a store with Mr. Miyagi as his partner to sell bonsai trees. I like the Japanese kind of trees, as Mr. Miyagi is reluctant about it at first, as Daniel wants to buy a store instead of college education, while Terry has to pretend to be poor like Mr. Miyagi and Daniel in order to fool them, as he's the Cobra Kai sensei now and hires Mike Barnes to torment Daniel while Daniel buys the store. And Mr. Miyagi declines at first, but Daniel shows Mr. Miyagi the building itself, and Daniel feels like the most alienating character, as we'll see why later in the film, as this time I don't follow him, as I don't like him in this movie. And Mr. Miyagi comes off unlikable too, as he goes da 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 quite a bit of times in this movie, and it really got on my nerves after a while. Terry introduces himself to Mike Barnes as well as his partner Snake and Dennis and buys Terry himself a champion. And these other characters are come off very unlikable in this movie, and the actors are acting kind of like nasty people in this for this whole movie, which is a main problem with this movie. Mr. Miyagi teaches Daniel more karate on a mountain, and the scene is shot breathtakingly, but the music in this scene is rather obnoxious, as this whole movie is obnoxious. Daniel goes across the street in a pottery store and buys some pots from Jessica Andrews, played by Robin Lively, as they get interrupted by her ex boyfriend and goes back to a paper not signed by Mr. Miyagi, as this is the point when Daniel becomes a jerk, comes off like a jerk in this movie. Later that night, Terry sneaks around the house of Mr. Miyagi's and learns more about Miyagi and Daniel, and they bought a store as Daniel enters the room and Mr. Miyagi comes back to the house to grab something while Daniel goes out on a first date with Jessica, as we learn she's from Columbus, Ohio, and shows her the shop as Snake and Mike come to the store and try to make Daniel sign the application to compete against Mike, but he says no, and they agree if he sleeps on it, which doesn't work out as Terry comes by to tell Daniel and Mr. Miyagi that John Kreese is dead, which is a lie. He's still alive, as he's not fooling me, but fooling them as they're fools for believing in that. And the movie is bad enough as it is. Mike, Snake, and Dennis break into the building and break stuff while telling him to sign the paper. And Mr. Miyagi comes in to save Daniel and Jessica. And is the movie a schoolyard fight? Because it sure seems like it, while Daniel becomes a bigger jerk to Mr. Miyagi, as I want to be done with the character of Daniel at this point, and I don't want any more from this movie's, unfortunately. Although there is one more before that remake next time. There's one more before the remake, as the franchise is damaged for good. Terry's men steal the bonsai trees, as he tells the cops, and they don't do anything about it, which is typical, I'll say. And Mr. Miyagi is the same way, as they do nothing. Daniel gets the tree himself from a mountain and jumps down with ropes with Jessica until Daniel gets to the tree, and they accidentally drop the tree in the water, and Mike, Snake, and Dennis appear to face him to sign the paper. And once again, and he does before they ever let them back up and break the tree in half. And this is getting to the point I really don't like this movie, as the characters are completely despicable. Daniel brings the tree back broken, as he ordered more trees, Mr. Miyagi I mean, with the money he sold from the truck they had, and Daniel asks Mr. Miyagi to train him, but says no, as he's training himself, and drinks water briefly, with Jessica training him and getting countered by Terry, who offers him some training and accepts is something he will which is something he will regret by the end of the movie. Like, I already regret watching this movie in the first place. Daniel asks Mr. Miyagi to show him a karate sweep, but brings out a broom instead while acting selfish. And next thing you know, while Terry trains in the dojo, I hear sirens. And did we really need the sirens in the background? Daniel learns karate the Cobra Kai way, in which he doesn't realize at the time, as Terry asks to break some 2x4s, in which Daniel can't, as he ends the day with an injured foot. And Mr. Miyagi notices it and asks Daniel about his foot and lies about it, but can't fool Mr. Miyagi, as Daniel wants to tell Mr. Miyagi, and the script is so bad it makes the characters look into jerks by the end of the day. Terry makes Daniel punch the wood, as Daniel can't, and he punches it again and again as Terry laughs. And can someone tell Daniel he's making a fool of himself while he has a bruise on his elbow? And Mr. Miyagi knocks on his door, and Daniel is upset with Mr. Miyagi. And we see Daniel at the Cobra Kai some more, and punches the wood and bleeds his fist as he punches the last piece of wood. Daniel and Jessica go dancing, and Terry pays a man to get punched by Daniel, and as he punches him, Terry shows himself to Daniel and praises him about it, and Daniel doesn't want to know what he's done, as he apologizes to Jessica and tries to apologize to the guy he punched, and does so to Mr. Miyagi, as Jessica takes off the next day to Columbus, Ohio. And I wish I could care, but unfortunately I just don't really care. Daniel goes back to Cobra Kai to tell Terry it's over, and as he does, he learns he hired Mike for help to get revenge for John against Daniel. And they beat up Daniel briefly, as Mr. Miyagi comes in and beats up John and Terry insults Mr. Miyagi as he beats up Terry and gets him back karate style and mocks him and walks out. And Mr. Miyagi trains Daniel for the karate tournament, and Mike does the same thing, and it's like a Rocky montage where they train, but this is never going to be as good as the first Karate Kid or Rocky 1, 3, and 4. Daniel puts back the tree he tried to get Mr. Miyagi, with Mr. Miyagi in the scene, is pretty to look at, but it's not acted or shot very well. The karate tournament championship begins as Mike wins the round to fight with Daniel as he torments him, and as the match begins, the crowd cheers Daniel's name as they're rooting for him, and the fight begins with Mike scaring and beating up Daniel at the same time, as he never gets a chance on hitting Mike as he punches Daniel until the final round. Daniel flips Mike and punches him and wins the climax just didn't make me care as much as the first film, and the director needs to stop making sequels to things that are a classic for a good reason. Now it's time for the rating. I'll give this movie a 2.8 out of 10. The movie is terribly written, acted, shot, and made, as the characters are absolutely terrible. The writing makes the characters look very unlikable, as I don't like any of these characters, as the acting is just obnoxious by the actors. The shots are pretty at times, but most of the time it looks awful, as there is a good reason to not do a classic movie sequel again and again, as well as a remake. Well, we'll get there in a couple more times, and that is it never works as well as the original, and this is proving my point. So I'd like to thank you guys for joining me, and next time I will be back with the next Karate Kid. And until next time, karate is good for self-defense.